So a few weeks back, I bought one of the new Apple Studio displays. I wanted an external monitor to go with my 14-inch MacBook Pro, and I really wanted to get a 5K one, as I was used to that from my 27-inch iMac. So I've had a chance to use this monitor a while now, and so here are my thoughts. Now the monitor that I bought was just the standard one. That is, I didn't need the nano texture, and I certainly was not prepared to pay the quite ridiculous price that Apple is charging for the height adjustable stand. But I'm quite happy with what I've got. Now this monitor did attract some negative comments when it came out over various issues. Some of these I think are justified, but others not, and I'll talk about those later on. First, let me say what I think are the really good features of this monitor. I'd start with the appearance. I mean, the appearance, the design is typical Apple quality. The monitor looks really great. It has an all aluminium enclosure with a glass front. There's no use of cheap plastic or anything. The stand is a single piece of aluminum. I mean, it really does look great. If you've seen one, I think you'll agree. The bezels could be a bit thinner maybe, but they're fine for me. So certainly in terms of design and appearance, I don't think there's many monitors on the market, if any, to beat it. Now secondly, there is the display itself, which of course is the key feature. And again, for me, the display is quite superb. As I say, it's 5K, which of course is higher than 4K. It has a resolution of 5120 by 2880 pixels, giving it a 14.7 million pixels, I believe. It actually, when you're using it in its normal Retina default mode, it uses 2x scaling, so the actual effective resolution, if you like, is half that. It's 2560 by 1440, so that each of those points comprises 4 pixels. What this means, of course, is that the display is pin sharp. I mean, it's the sharpest, the best looking, the sharpest display that I've ever had, apart from the one on the 27-inch iMac, which was the same. Although it is an improvement on that, I think. I mean, text is pin sharp. You cannot see any pixels whatsoever. I have a very good 4K display by HP, which is very good, but you do notice that the text on that is not, although it's very good, it's not quite as sharp and perfect as it is on this 5K display. Of course, photographs and videos use the full 5120 by 2080, so they look really great too. It has the P3Y color gamut that Apple seems to be using as standard now on its displays. The colors themselves are really rich and vibrant. It has reference modes too, the same as the ones on my MacBook Pro. So I'm assuming that indicates that the color accuracy is very good on this monitor. I haven't tested that with any device like a Spider Pro or something like that, but certainly the colors look really great. Some people have said that it's just the same as the old 27-inch iMac display. Well, it is, and it isn't. Clearly it's 5K, it's the same resolution and so on, but it does have higher brightness. The peak brightness is 600 nits, whereas I believe it was only 400 nits on the 27-inch iMac. And also, as I say, it has these reference modes, these different color gamuts, which you can choose for photography or video, which does suggest, which my old iMac didn't have, which does suggest that the color accuracy is better. It's been factory calibrated. So now some people have suggested that the monitor is not as good as it could be for reasons I'll talk about later. But certainly for me, I can't see any problems with it. I think it's superb. The audio system which is on this monitor, of course, this display has I think it's an A13 Bionic chip that's in it, which is unusual, of course, for a monitor. And Apple, in their presentation, made a big thing about this in that it supports center stage on the webcam and also spatial audio on the audio system. In fact, the audio system is another great feature of this monitor. It has a 6-speaker system, 4 woofers, 2 tweeters. Apple said that it's the best audio system on any display they've made. I don't know if they said any display at all, but certainly I must say that it is very, very good. Far, far better than was on my old iMac, better than the speakers on my new MacBook Pro, although those are very good, and certainly better than any other monitor I've used. You can definitely listen to music on this. There's more than enough bass, and the highs are clear as well. The bass is clean, it's not boomy. It really is, they really do sound great. And of course, it does support, as I think I mentioned, spatial audio. So you can listen to Apple Music files in spatial audio and also Apple lossless files up to, I think it's 24-bit, 96 kilohertz. And also, of course, particularly because of spatial audio, watching movies that have Dolby Atmos and TV shows, that's great as well. So it's a great. The speakers really do add something to the monitor. They're perfectly good enough for both movie watching and music listening. Finally, the other great thing I think about this monitor is its connectivity. It has 4 ports on the back. There's one Thunderbolt 3 USB-C port, which is the one, I think that's called the downstream port. In other words, that's the one that you use to connect the display to your Mac. As I say, I use it with my 14-inch MacBook Pro, but obviously you can connect it to any other Mac which has a suitable Thunderbolt port. And that port, as well as connecting the display, provides charging of up to 96 watts of power, which is very useful because that's enough to fast charge my 14-inch MacBook Pro, and obviously more than enough for a MacBook Air. So that's very useful. In addition to that, you have 3 other USB-C ports. They're not Thunderbolt or anything; they're just USB-C. But they have the fastest data speed of 10 gigabytes per second. So those are great, obviously, for connecting peripherals like external SSD drives and cameras and so on. So I find that very useful because, in effect, the display gives me a USB-C hub. So I don't need to buy a separate one for that. So overall, I think the display is very, very good in terms of those 4 aspects: the design, the actual display itself, the audio system, and the connectivity. Just one other point about the audio system. It does also have 3 microphones, which Apple calls studio quality. I think that's a bit of a stretch. They're perfectly good enough for video conferencing, Zoom calls, FaceTime, and so on. But I certainly wouldn't want to try and record a podcast or a video like this using them. You need a dedicated microphone for that. But those are the really good points of the display. Let me now turn to some of the criticisms that have been leveled at it. So there have been 4 main areas of criticism, I think, of this display. And as I say, I think some of the criticisms are justified, but others I don't think are. The first one is the claim by some that the display uses old technology, by which they mean that it's not mini LED, and it doesn't have the 120 hertz ProMotion feature, both of which, of course, are found in the displays on the new MacBook Pros. Well, that's certainly true. It is just ordinary LED, if that's the correct term, and it's only 60 hertz. But I have to say, for me, it's not, these things are not an issue at all. I don't notice the display being noticeably inferior to the one on my 14-inch MacBook Pro. Yes, it doesn't have quite the dynamic range. The blacks are not quite as black, and maybe the highlights not quite as bright. So it's not as good for watching HDR content, but it's still very, very good. The differences are, to my eyes at any rate, quite slight. And I certainly don't miss having the 120 hertz ProMotion. For the sort of work that I do, 120 hertz is not required by any means. And I certainly don't need the mini LED. Obviously, if you want those two features, then you would need to plump for another display, or maybe stick with just the display on a new MacBook Pro. But I think for the vast majority of people who would buy and use this display, those two missing features are not significant. The display, as I say, I think is excellent. And of course, if you were to add those features, if the display did have mini LED and ProMotion, it would make it even more expensive. And of course, it's already a very expensive display. The second area of criticism was concerned the webcam, and here I think some of the criticisms were justified to some extent. The webcam is certainly not as good as Apple were claiming in their presentation. It's definitely better than webcams they put in their laptops previously. Certainly much better than the one in the M1 MacBook Air. But it's not as good as the camera on your iPhone, for example, or probably not as good as the one on an iPad. But on the other hand, it's not as bad as some people were claiming. Some reviewers were saying that the pictures were grainy and soft and so on. Well, in my experience, provided you have adequate lighting, and that's true of any camera, you get a perfectly adequate picture. More than good enough for video conferencing, for Zoom calls, for FaceTime, which I think is what it's primarily aimed at. You're not going to be recording videos like this one with it, but for what it would be, its intended use, I find it to be perfectly fine. Now, the other criticism, and this is definitely a valid one, is the fact that Apple chose not to include the height adjustable stand as a standard. It's just a tilt adjustable stand, and if you want the height adjustable stand, you have to pay a ridiculous amount of extra money. It's another £400 here in the UK, which is absolutely outrageous. Apple should not be charging £400 simply so that you can raise the monitor up and down. I mean, it should have been standard anyway, I think, but certainly if you were going to have to pay extra, it should have been £100 at the absolute maximum, probably less. I'd say more like £50 extra just to get the height adjustable stand. As it happens, the monitor I have with the tilt adjustable stand is at a perfectly acceptable height anyway, so I haven't had to put it on some books or something like that to raise it up. Obviously, if you needed to lower it, that would be very difficult. But fortunately, I found it to be at a reasonable height. But I still think that it should have been a height adjustable stand as standard as it is on the vast majority of other monitors. The final criticism is over the price. It is expensive. It costs a lot more than other monitors on the market, but you have to remember that there aren't any other, I don't think, 5K monitors. I think the old LG ultrafine one that Apple used to sell is still available, but that certainly is not as good as the display. It doesn't have the same design quality. It doesn't have the same peak brightness. I don't think it has the reference modes, and I think the availability of it is fairly limited, I think. So, in other words, if you don't buy this display, then the alternatives are 4K displays. Now, there are some very, very good 4K displays around for a lot less money. But if, as I did, if you want the full 5K, particularly if you've got used to that, if you had a 27-inch iMac and you're used to 5K and you really want that, then the studio display, I think, is really the only option, which I suppose is part of the reason why Apple can afford to charge a premium price and get away with it. But does that mean it's not value for money? Well, it depends. For me, I'd have to say that it is value for money. The quality of the display, the really excellent audio system, the speaker system, the connectivity, and the way it looks. Because people who buy Apple products one of the reasons they tend to do so is because of the design and the appearance. And this monitor certainly does look great on my desk, and it complements my MacBook Pro very well. So taking all those things into consideration, the design, the display, the audio, and the connectivity, then I think it was, at least for me, worth the cost. But obviously, if you're quite happy with 4K, if you're not really bothered about the speakers because maybe you've got a set of desktop speakers anyway, then you can certainly purchase an excellent 4K display for a lot less than this studio display costs, and you'd be happy with that. But if you want 5K, then I would recommend the studio display.